Hi, welcome to my second review of the longest running film series based on Ian Fleming's James Bond 007. I'm picking each film based on its distinct quality, so join me now for the next 007 body count. Coming in at number 2 of that count is From Russia with Love, a very significant film of the series. This was the movie that laid the essential foundation for every Bond movie afterwards. To this day, many loyal fans regard this to be the best film of the series. Released in theaters at the height of the Cold War in 1963, the novel it was based on, of the same title, was stated to be among one of President John F. Kennedy's favorite books. Based on that, and the success of the previous film, Dr. No, Saltzman and Broccoli targeted that book for the next Bond film, a film that was to be the last of which John F. Kennedy would see the day before he was assassinated. Now, in particular, the title sequence for this film says it all. Arranged and put together by Robert Brownjohn, rampant with sexual overtones, the opening credits are projected onto Lena Lenya, a belly dancer and model who reappears later in the same film at a gypsy camp again as a dancer of the same type. The whole sequence foreshadows the flavor and texture of the movie. Brownjohn's flair for artistic expression through film media gives the audience a taste of intrigue, eroticism, and adventure. This was to become the template for all Bond movies afterwards, with Goldfinger's title sequence being made in a very similar fashion, only this time projecting film scenes onto Margaret Nolan, covered in gold grease paint, wearing a bikini, and like Leela, appears later on briefly in the same film. Being the second film of the series, another precedent that it establishes is being the first film with a pre-title sequence. It was actually shot in the gardens of the restaurant of Pinewood Studios, which many people to this day come to visit because of that. Incidentally, the first gadget is introduced as well, but by the villain or henchman, a watch that you can use to garrote or choke someone to death, with a tiny knob you'd normally use to adjust time, also being able to be pulled out to use as a cord as a choking device. It was Saltzman's idea to show 007 to be killed at the beginning of the movie, increasing the tension, only to find out that it's part of a deadly training procedure with an agent posing as Bond for their most dangerous assassin to target. Being stalked through a maze of hedges and marble pathways at night, the scene establishes the tone for the whole movie. A tone that tends to resurface in more Bond films to follow, with death being the constant companion of the MI6 agent. In You Only Live Twice, he's assassinated in the very beginning, only for audiences to find out that it was staged to throw off his enemies. Even to this very day, in the most recent installment of the film series, Skyfall, he supposedly dies from a fatal shot in the very beginning in the pre-title sequence, but survives. Another first that became the protocol for all future Bond films is the assignment of gadgets for the main character. In this case, a black leather attaché case equipped with a cartridge of tear gas, camouflaged as deodorant that exploded if not opened properly. It also had an AR-7 folding sniper's rifle packed inside, gold currency minted in coins, pressed in a belt made of leather accessible internally within the case, and a flat throwing knife that you could eject externally from the edge outside. Desmond Llewellyn is introduced as Q, the famous head of the weapons department of British intelligence. A fan of the Bond comic strip published by the Daily Express, he accepted the part as Peter Burton, who played the same role in the first film, Dr. No, was unavailable for this film. Directing 4 of the earlier films, Terence Young had a flair for realism, portraying scenes in this movie with a very dark, eerie texture, along with John Barry's score, which really stands out during the scene where Bond and Tanya meet at St. Sophia. From Russia with Love is all about atmosphere. Most of the scenes have a dark texture, with the characters staying in the shadows, waiting for the right opportunity to strike, keeping audiences on edge. This is the one film of the series where the most memorable moments are attributable to the setting. Being so, the climax of the story for both the book and the movie takes place on the Orient Express, 10 years later, Connery would appear once again on that same line in the film adaptation of Agatha Christie's Murder on the Orient Express. An interesting note of trivia is that the main character of that film, Poirot, the famous super sleuth French detective, is played by Albert Finney, who 39 years later appears in a Bond film himself, specifically in Skyfall as Kincaid, a caretaker of sorts who shares a direct link with the main character's past. The novel of the same title is a Cold War thriller having nothing to do with Spectre, or Blofeld for that matter, making Smersh the main protagonist of the story. It's because of the Cold War, incidentally, that during production it was decided to make Smersh unwillful pawns, with Spectre engineering the whole thing. That's probably why more newer audiences always commonly associate Spectre with the older films, and why you always see Spectre in the older films to begin with. The Lecter decoder was, in fact, an Enigma cryptograph that was developed not during the Cold War but World War II. Fleming had learned about it while serving for British Naval Intelligence, and he actually tried to acquire it. In a book by author Sally Hibbins titled The Official James Bond Movie Book, which marked the 25th anniversary of the series, she pointed out how ahead of its time the chess tournament scene is, and quote, even though being shot in the 60s has a very 80s feel to it. Production design for the shot was handled by Sid Kane, and optical effects for the ceiling by matte painter Cliff Culley. Incidentally, that scene was based on Boris Spassky's victory over David Bronstein in an international chess tournament in 1960. Lena Lenya won a Tony Award for her role as Jenny in Mark Blitzstein's English version of the Three-Penny Opera in 1956, but she'll always be remembered for her role in this film as Colonel Klebb, the Russian officer who defected to Spectre. With a persona in real life the total opposite of what audiences saw on screen, Lenya was a very versatile actress that added a great deal of suspense to her role, especially in the scene where Tatiana and her character meet. In a very risque scene for its time, we see the character as slightly homoerotic and sadistic. Daniela Bianchi took the role of Tatiana Romanova, offered by the producers based on a choice that they gave Sean Connery to make, as he selected her from a trio of runner-ups from the Miss Universe pageant. In this film, the first meeting between Bond and Romanova was taken verbatim in terms of dialogue from the book, despite the license the filmmakers took with embellishing Fleming's story for the screenplay. As a Bond girl, the character of Tatiana Romanova could be associated with many women in history who were in a position to use power of seduction to influence fate, like Mata Hari, the famed seductress of World War I, who was able to solicit secrets from powerful men, which had deadly consequences on the battlefield. Only Tatiana is a pawn herself being used for that purpose, unsuspecting bait for Bond to take the Lecter decoder out from underneath the Russian's nose, so an assassin from Spectre could kill the both of them and take the Lecter. Based on a recommendation from director John Ford, Mexican-born actor Pedro Armendáriz played the role of Kerim Bey, a Turkish military representative who was named for Bond for the mission. While shooting, it was actually discovered that he was suffering from the advanced stages of cancer and was actually hardly able to walk, needing a stand-in for scenes of him shot from behind. He passed away not too long after the release of the film, but left a legacy as one of the most memorable supporting roles in a Bond film. 26 years later, his son Pedro Armendáriz Jr. would appear as the character of Hector Lopez in the Bond film License to Kill, as the president of the fictional nation Isthmus. Most who saw this film would probably never forget the famous gut-wrenching scene featuring Alicia Gur, another runner-up for Miss Universe that year, and former Miss Jamaica Martine Beswick, a scene reminiscent and possibly an influence on future grindhouse-type films like Faster Pussycat Kill Kill. Two women in a gypsy camp settle a rivalry for the same man in a catfight grudge match to the death, serving as more than a prelude to the following raid of that same camp. The scene took literally about a month and a half to prepare for with the stunt coordinator and the girls. Perhaps most unforgettable of all would be Robert Shaw as he portrayed Donald Grant, the assassin who cold-bloodedly trails after Bond. Most audiences known him as the character of Quint from the Spielberg film Jaws. He was also nominated for an Oscar in 1966 for his role in A Man for All Seasons. He died of a heart attack in 1978, but left a legacy in film and literature, even inspiring Marvel Comics to name the next supervillain for the X-Men after him, Sebastian Shaw. Throughout the whole film, his character stalks Bond with no dialogue whatsoever, waiting to actually stage a bit of a deception, posing as the agent he has to meet at the station. And that's where his dialogue starts, to make the deception seem real and to carry out the plan by killing them both to take the Lecter. It's at that point that Bond pulls off his own deception, enticing Grant with a bribe using the gold currency in his black attaché case, at gunpoint tricking the captor into opening up that same case the wrong way, setting off the tear gas cartridge inside. That's what led to one of the most violent fight scenes that probably could have ever been seen on screen. Stunt doubles were only used for one shot of this sequence, with director Terrence Young shooting it all the way in close quarters with Shaw and Connery, making it look real enough to make the producer's heart palpitate. It's cinematic for sure, but it looks like it's shot in real time, even though it isn't, and you really think that these guys are really actually killing each other. To sum it all up, over the years, From Russia with Love maintained a standing as perhaps the strongest film of the series, a substantial feather in the cap of Sean Connery, who 25 years later went on to win an Oscar for his supporting role in the film The Untouchables. But in the 1960s, he was the quintessential Bond, who actually gave the character drawing power at the box office, with each film to follow making substantially more money than his predecessor. In some ways, this film is a lot like a Hitchcock film, even though Hitchcock is a totally different director from Terrence Young. They think totally differently. But you had the visual cues that were shown to the audience through elements of the story that the characters on the screen were totally unaware of, which really built a lot of suspense. But you also had the explosive climaxes that have become the signature of this film series. Thanks again for watching this video. That's 2 with 5 more to go, making the body count a total of 7. 007, that is, with my 3rd to come in a few weeks, with fun facts that will again leave you shaken but not stirred. Ciao.